She is the mother of Mattie Stepanek, the prolific poet, peace advocate, and philosopher who captured the hearts of media figures and the public alike. Oprah Winfrey, Larry King, Jimmy Carter, and countless others were touched by his message and the Catholic faith that informed it. Jeni Stepanek carries on his message despite her own physical challenges and is herself a courageous example of living and loving beyond disability and loss. I've sat down with her here in EWTN's DC studios to talk about the state of Mattie Stepanek's cause for sainthood and with his longtime friend, Cheryl Kerwin. She shares her thoughts on Mattie and the origins of his message of peace. Here's my exclusive interview with Dr. Jeni Stepanek. It seems Mattie's message has exploded in the last few months, in the last year or so. What's happening? Why do you think that is? And in what way is it exploding?
Both Mattie's Foundation, which is the Peace Mission, and Mattie's Guild, which you founded to consider his cause of canonization. You're right, in the last 6 to 12 months, there's really been a transition from little events and organizing and kind of putting things out there to people saying we want more. And with the foundation, we now have the governor of Maryland on board and the senators and all these schools and camps saying we need more, we need more, we love this message. Mm-hmm. And really the Guild, that back in 2010 when you talked about it, 2012 when you founded it, mm-hmm. I feel like the first 5 or 6 years it was really, what is this Guild? Who is this Guild? What does a Guild even do? Yeah. And suddenly in the last year, the Guild has nonprofit status. It has firm directors. It's moved from organizing mm-hmm. to gathering witness testimony and organizing that. At the website, social media, events. Why? I would say there's really two major things going on. And one is it's a new generation of people that are suddenly hearing about Mattie for the first time, because we're 15 years out from his presence on earth. And the other is that we're now also moving into almost 20 years since some major life events in our world. Mm-hmm. And back in 2001 when Mattie shared For Our World and Just Peace, and he's on Oprah for the first time, and mm-hmm. It's going on almost 20 years since then, and I think that we can do this. Peace is possible, life is worthy. Mm-hmm. I think people are realizing we need to commit ourselves to peace and hope and life and our neighbors again.
Mm-hmm. Tell me how Mattie was different from other children. I mean, you've had your own children, you had grandchildren.
Right.
Why was he different?
The things he spoke about at such an early age, one of the things I would like to impart is my Mattie moment of his second birthday party. This is a child who was supposed to die. He was baptized right after birth because they weren't sure what was going to happen. He then had a formal baptism. So it kept progressing, and here we are now. He was 2 years old, living in a small house with a big backyard is what I remember, because the birthday party was it was summer, you know, July, summer, so I had a big party. And he, you know, Mattie had a trach, he had learned to sign language because he couldn't breathe on his own when he was first born in the beginning. So at that party, there were neighbors, there were those of us from his parish, Mount Calvary Catholic Church, and then doctors, nurses, and staff from the hospital where he had, you know, been in and out of all this time. And that's what struck me, was these doctors and nurses that I spoke with walking around at the party, to a person, said they had no idea why he was here, that he should not have made it. They had no earthly, if you will, explanation.
Tell me about that mission of peace, that message of peace. When did you become aware that this was important to him?
I would say maybe a year or two after after his second birthday, my next Mattie moment is in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, at the home they were living in, the home they had. He was about 3-ish, 3.5, 4, and again, the level of a child that age. Yes, he played. He was obviously, because he was home, he was well enough to be doing things. He wasn't in the hospital. But he would be in costume a lot of times, either when I arrived or shortly after I arrived. He'd have a sword in his hand. He'd be a knight. He'd be Robin Hood. He was a dragon, I think, one time when I went over. But then you never knew. I mean, he was talking. And this is when I realized, and you know, how astute Jeni was, that she was writing things down. These were his poems. These were these beginning poems. And it was like, what child at 3 talks about God, talks about heaven? And he was a regular churchgoer, so it wasn't completely unusual, but the level of like knowing where heaven was. No, my 3-year-old granddaughter wouldn't have known that. And then he'd run around and all of a sudden he'd be in front of us and say, why is there war? Why are people hating each other? And again, that's not normal talk for a child that age.
Now, he was also a lector at your parish.
Well, that was my next Mattie moment. Is it wasn't my parish. She had moved to another. This was that Most Holy Rosary. But when I found out, my husband and I found out that he was lecturing already at this young age, we would go sometimes to Mass when Mattie was there. And again, knew this was different. This is a child at this young age. He knew Raymond. He knew what he was saying. He knew he was proclaiming the Word of God.
And you were also struck by how attuned he was to current events at a young age.
One of my favorite of his poems is the Note to Bosnia. So that was something I mean, again, what child is watching that on TV and being affected by it?
What do you think of the possibility, of the prospect of Mattie and a cause for Mattie moving forward? Did you see that virtue, that heroic virtue?
To me, again, he was beating the odds, not just with his physical disabilities. I was unfortunately or fortunately around for the divorce time period too. And that, you know, there were things there that were definitely affecting Mattie, but yet he was still full of joy. He was still a fun-loving young little boy. So I felt like he was beating adversity.
I've always been struck in reading Jeni's book and talking to people who knew him, his concern for other people.
Yes.
What did you see of him going out to others, concern for others?
When I went to book signings, his care for I mean, he was mesmerizing to both children and adults, because most of them had already read some of his poetry, seen some of it, and now, you know, we're coming to get yet another of his books. And his care, you know, he might not have been feeling well, he might not have been on his best day, but you sure didn't know it. You didn't. The kids were all, you know, he wanted to talk to them individually. That was, to me, you know, striking. He's definitely someone that God gave the fruits of the Holy Spirit: love, joy, peace, generosity, and he used those gifts. So many of us don't use those gifts, but he did.
Tell me about the cause. In November, the prayer, Mattie's prayer was unveiled. There was a nice, huge reaction to it.
Yes.
Where do you see the cause now? And it's got to be difficult as his mother to see this cause taking shape, which is moving toward canonization.
Where the cause is now is as more people are either remembering Mattie, they're re-remembering him, or they're learning about him for the very first time in school or through news or through the Peace Day events. As that's happening, we're getting this sudden surge of people that are sending through social media, through letters, through snail mail, through email, Mattie inspires me, Mattie inspires me, my life is different because of Mattie. And where the cause is now is trying to help people know how to share that information in a way that would advance the cause.
And I know on the mattieforsainthood.org website, they're also asking to be a part of creating Mattie's Book of Virtues. What
Yes.
is that?
My understanding of that is that the beginning of the cause, and the mommy of me says this is the hardest part, okay? It is establishing that this is a child who lived a challenging life, not just disability. He also knew what it was like to be bullied. He knew what it was like to watch a world falling apart when he feels like his job is to be a peacemaker and a messenger of hope and peace. So it's more than disability that was his suffering. He knew what it was like to bury siblings, to have a mother with a disability, to go through divorce. So to establish that he lived a challenging life and yet chose to live that life with purpose from God, to live in a virtuous way, to live with kindness, hope, faith, peace, charity, all the things that we define as virtues. So to establish that both through everything that he wrote, everything that people wrote about him and to him when he was alive, and then to support that with letters and testimony from people who either remember him
Right.
or never knew him but knew of him or are learning of him now. And you asked earlier how hard that is for me.
Right.
On one hand, it's very exciting to think that my son's life, which he lived his life for God, he lived with purpose, with choice, deliberately sharing messages that were placed in his heart by God. And he chose to play after storms. He chose to comfort the baby in the next bed in the ICU rather than tend to his own emotions. He did that for God, and so it's very exciting, and I'm in awe that here we are 15 years later and it's advancing. It's also difficult because it means my son is not here. I would so much rather have my son turn 29 this summer and I say, where do you want to go for dinner? Than where are we going to have a Mattie symposium so we can tell people about his life.
What do you think as a mother when you read these recollections and remembrances of Mattie? I mean, are you learning anything about him?
Oh, I am. There are stories that people share that I didn't know. I mean, people remind me of things that I've forgotten. I continue. I mean, I'm getting letters from. There's a man that is taking Mattie messages to youth in Rikers Island, that are incarcerated youth, and then the youth who aren't even allowed to have pencils with erasers because they might take the metal off. I mean, so they're writing with little stubby pencils. Letters to me about Mattie's character is teaching me that I can choose my character, that even if I live a rough life, even if my parents are divorced, or even if I've witnessed violence, I can still choose hope and peace, and I can live a life of purpose. To hear things from people who have disabilities that are inspired, or people who question life for themselves. Yes, I mean, some of it is uplifting for me, and some of it is new, and it's all very inspiring.
On June 22nd, this Saturday, there's a memorial mass for Mattie. Monsignor Pope will be leading that. Now, Monsignor, who's been on our program before, he knew Mattie.
Yes.
Tell me, how did he come into to cross your path and Mattie's?
Monsignor Pope was Father Charles back in the day. I went to his ordination, so I got to know Father Charles at a friendship and a priest level. And across the years, as Mattie came in, he came to our house. He did home masses. He was there. He asked to be present when Mattie's brother Jamie died, because he died at home. And we just got to be good friends, and we've remained friends. And I'm so proud when I saw him become a Monsignor Pope instead of Father Charles.
Right.
And he will be doing the homily on June 22nd.
Now, there's an annual Peace Day that the foundation
Yes.
runs and hosts every year.
Yes.
That's on July 13th. It's in Rockville. What do you expect will be different about this year's Peace Day?
This year's Peace Day is different in a couple of ways. One will be, I hope, the size and the magnitude. Last year we made a leap from 100, 200 people to somewhere between 500 and 700 people. And I really am hoping for 1,001, so I can say more than 1,000 people came to Peace Day. So we'll have more activities, more people, you know, more presence from elected leaders who are now turning to Mattie for how do I be an elected leader, represent the people, and stay rooted to tending to basic human needs and neighbors, getting to know neighbors and building hope and peace in my community. The other thing is that the Guild will actually have a table in our Cake and Conversation community tent.
As you said, Mattie would have been 29 this July 17th. What's the heart of that message that goes on, that's needed?
That hope is real. It's not an illusion, and that hope is an energy that moves us into the next moment. That peace is possible, and here's how peace is possible. Get to know your neighbor, talk to your neighbor, educate, tend to basic human needs. Learn to be okay with yourself. Even if you're different and have challenges, you can still be okay if your needs are tended to. And when you are okay, move from here to here and ask your neighbor, are you okay? Learn about resilience and kindness. Teach this to other children, to elected leaders, and that life is worthy.
As you look forward to his possible sainthood, how do you see that cause proceeding? If you had to define what Mattie might advocate formally.
I know what I would say would be what Mattie wanted to advocate for. And Mattie wanted to advocate for all people, particularly children and youth, because children and youth then inspire adults and leaders who want to take care of the children and youth. So he saw that as the full circle. Mattie reached out to infants, to children, to teenagers, and to the elderly. He did not want to be limited to people with disabilities. He wanted to be a messenger for those youth who are on the streets and think they're caught in gangs. So I think Mattie today would be inspired knowing that the imam and pastor in Nigeria have brought Mattie's message to warring gangs that are Muslim and Christian, and they're now called Mattie's ambassadors, and they're now peaceful with each other rather than hurting each other. I think he would want to be a messenger for all people who are searching for hope, searching for peace.
For more on Mattie Stepanek's amazing life, Mattie's prayer, and the cause for sainthood, visit MattieMatters.org. And for those of you in the D.C. area, the 15th anniversary Memorial Mass for Mattie will be celebrated on Saturday, June 22nd, this weekend, at St. Francis Catholic Church in Durwood, Maryland. All the details are at MattieMatters.org, including information on this year's Peace Day celebration on July 13th.